guess we're good to go, and I'll call the special select board meeting of March 25th to order. And the first item is approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Are there any changes? We've had an executive session, and after we get done with the contracts part of the executive session, I'd like to have everybody stay, and we'll work on the personnel part of the executive session. So all in favor of approving the agenda, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, first item in the meeting is we've moved the meeting ahead to 6:30 and on Monday, so that this is the day when our local legislators have off to do meet with local constituents, do their research, and we're taking advantage of an opportunity to meet with some of our local legislators. And so far, we have Amy Sheldon.
Chris is here.
I think there were others planning to come. I know.
So we have
There we
Karen
are.
Horn from the VLCT on the conference phone.
Okay. And Senator Bray is here also. So I'll open it up. There was a list of potential topics. Maybe we'd ought to, if you would like to first, there's anything you want to say as a preamble to our discussion, or would you rather just have questions and answer questions?
Why don't they sit up and maybe?
Yeah, if you could both, since it's just two of you, why don't you both come up to the table and you can share the mic? I'm sure that those watching the TV would like to hear your comments on things.
Good evening, ladies before gentlemen.
Yeah, go ahead.
Why don't we start with questions? So we had some questions specifically, and then if there's things that we don't touch on, then we would certainly enjoy your impressions of the session, how it's going, and maybe we'd start with that. Your impressions of the session, and how's it going in your committees, and what are the big nuts you're trying to crack?
All right. I guess I'm a new chair of the House Natural Resources and Fish and Wildlife Committee. So I have, I'm learning a lot about managing 11 people and driving an agenda every day to try to be productive and bring new members along. We went from a 9-member committee to an 11-member committee, and as most of you are aware, the focus of our work this session is around Act 250 and updating it after the summer, year-and-a-half long process for the Act 250 the next 50 years. The commission bill was brought into our committee as a committee bill. But we do have 3 new members and then a couple of members who are new to the committee. So we did a ton of just building and background, and then now we've gone through most of the sections of the topic areas of the bill, and now we're going back through and getting a first draft of what's called markup, which is editing the bill, and then inviting witnesses back in to help inform, questions that come up as we kind of make our way in an iterative process through the bill. We also are lucky to have Senator Bray on the other side, who has sent us a couple of bills that we are going to be prioritizing, and then I think there are a couple more bills that he'll be sending us. I'll let you take over from there.
Sure. So in the Senate Natural Resources and Energy, we wear those 2 hats. Sometimes they're pretty closely, the 2 roles are fairly closely linked. Like when we work on weatherization work, that's also ends up being economic development work, and it also has a environmental impact. So sometimes they're all knitted together, but we have focused for the first half of this legislative session through crossover, which was last Friday was the end of that, on clean natural resources work. So the Clean Water Initiative for this year is doing 2 things. One, it's tuning up the delivery system. We've been moving away from A&R managing every grant themselves out of Montpelier, and starting to do increasingly block grants down to the local level, which we've seen good results with, and it makes a lot of sense. People closest to the projects, they know the watersheds, they know the rivers, they know they know the land well enough and the water well enough to have a good sense of what projects are available, need work, etc. So we're continuing to develop in this year's Clean Water Bill, which is S96, the delivery system for block granting out and defining watershed level groups to deliver that work increasingly over the years to come. So we're kind of letting the clutch out. It's not an instant transition or anything, but that's the direction we're building. Another bill that we did was the PFAS bill, so polyfluorinated alkyl substances. PFOA is the one from Bennington that was in the headlines so much, but PFOA is one of roughly 5,000 of those chemicals. The state's regulating 5 of the 5,000, and they were only regulating for groundwater. So that was the well water exposures that people had down there. We said, okay, but we want to be protective of Vermonters' health wherever water is. So this year's bill says we should carry those same standards over to public water supplies. So I think that's where there'll be a connection for Middlebury. The bill proposes that every public water supply test to see what the background, what levels there are, and then we'll go from there. In part what we're struggling with is we don't really have a very good knowledge of how much of these PFAS chemicals are in water and where they are. We learned from Bennington to say, okay, if there's a manufacturing plant of a certain sort, you should look near that. If you have a runway where they've been doing firefighting training for aircraft and stuff using foams, that's another site to look. Near a wire manufacturing plant. But we haven't looked broadly. So S49 says we should look at exposures in municipal water supplies, private water supplies, and also in surface waters. We don't have standards defined there. And the connection there is a lot of PFAS makes it into surface water because the Coventry landfill, for instance, has leachate, that comes out of the bottom of that. It's a actively drained system. It produces about 20,000 gallons a day. That leachate has relatively high levels of PFAS in it. It's taken to 3 different wastewater treatment facilities, and basically, none of which were designed to detoxify PFAS or any of its cousins. Basically, they're normal wastewater treatment facilities. They're not chemical detoxification facilities. So we're, in essence, putting that into wastewater and then out into waters of the state in a diluted form, but still we're saying, okay, is this a smart way to handle it? Where we want to be prudent, and so that's P49. S49, there's some other things coming along. Plastics bill, which Middlebury has, I'm sure, an interest in. There were a number of people who put questions down about the plastics bill. So S113 will be on the Senate floor this week. It builds on the initiative that Middlebury did a vote on. It builds on what Brattleboro did. In essence, it does 4 things. One, it says for single-use plastic bags that we would ban them effective July 1 of 2020. So there's a pretty long phase-in, and that's in part because when we took testimony from Brattleboro, they said the reason they thought their program came online so smoothly was that they had ample time to develop the specifications, publish them, do public outreach, work with vendors to get alternate supplies, all that kind of stuff. And then when they came online live, July 1 of this past summer, that was almost without a hiccup. So that's the timeline for plastic bags. It also says and that's for retail and food service. There's also plastic straw. It's not quite a ban. You can still get one upon request. So a ban was judged to be too strong because there are people for whom, because of disabilities, et cetera, the only way they can drink is using a straw, often a flexible straw. we didn't want to put a burden on them to identify themselves as someone having a medical need for a straw or justification, nor did vendors want to have to sort of test whether or not someone qualified. So it's simply that they're not supplied anymore unless you make a request. And we've seen that in a lot of jurisdictions that works well. People, if they're not just given a straw without ever asking, the demand for straws goes way down. The third part of that is expanded polystyrene. So the foam, like foam coffee cups, etc. Polystyrene is problematic enough in terms of the logistics of trying to recycle it are very difficult. It causes a lot of contamination. It breaks into small bits. Probably everyone's dealt with tiny little bits of styrofoam floating around. They're very hard to sweep up, catch up. There always seems to be spreading. And then there's some health-related impacts. So between all those things, we're proposing to take polystyrene out of the waste stream, and also effective July 1, 2020. And last, creating a working group that will look at better management of the waste stream altogether, including looking at extended producer responsibility, by which I mean sort of the DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation, runs stewardship programs right now. So on things like paint, we now provide a way, when you buy paint, there's already, we provide a program to recycle that paint. We do the same thing with batteries. We do the same thing with light bulbs that contain mercury, switches that contain mercury, thermostats, all that kind of stuff. And the notion is, and it's been tested and proven, that if you have the manufacturer designing to anticipate the end of life disposition of that different choices will be made, and we get better, less costly recycling out of the whole thing. We reduce waste to begin with, and it recycles more inexpensively and at a higher percentage. So I think that too would have an impact here at the municipal level. So I've been working with Addison County Solid Waste District folks, Terry and Don, talking about there's always more to learn about waste. Every time so in our committee we say waste, the thing that brings us together every week. There's always a lot more to learn, and so we're figuring out those things. There's other smaller bills coming along, but I'd say between water, plastics, PFAS, those are really some of the bigger things from Senate Natural. And one other quick thing is, and a kind of exciting thing, Karen may talk about it, is in government operations. My afternoon committee, we did some work on a bill to allow municipalities to go into a pilot program which gives them far more freedom to basically run the town without doing charter changes to get permission to do many of the things that now require a charter change. So it's carving out a workspace for towns to do more self-governance. And the idea is to do a pilot that would run 5 years and have 10 towns in it, and see how that goes, and if it is effective, seeing everyone to take the pilot and maybe turn it into a full-fledged program statewide. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Senator Hardy, I asked everybody just to start with, and we kind of need to make it fairly quick, but so we can get into the questions. But just what's going on in your committee? What committee you're on? What's going on in your committee? The big muscle moves that you're working on, and any especially that will impact the town.
Okay. Have you gone? Okay. Well, thank you, Brian. I appreciate it. I don't need to be that close. The room's pretty small. Mm-hmm. I am, in the morning I serve on Senate Agriculture Committee, and in the afternoon I serve on the Senate Education Committee. And in agriculture this week, I see that there was a question from Nick about economic development. And so we will have on the floor on Wednesday a rural economic development bill that is specific to mostly agriculture and forestry industries and products in Vermont. And it's kind of a catch-all bill with lots of little things in it for both, related to both. So that I can answer more questions. I can't think of anything that would be specifically
relevant to you all, but certainly maybe actually you, Heather, personally, but so there are things that are relevant to the broader economy in Middlebury and Addison County, to the extent that people are involved in ag and forestry. And then, so that's this week. We also have a bill on hemp that's on the floor tomorrow, establishing a state hemp program and fees and regulations for this emerging crop. And I already know that people in Middlebury are growing hemp, and this will help regulate that and hopefully protect the market and make it a sort of Vermont brand market. We are working on a wetlands bill, which has become extremely complicated about ag practices on wetlands. And Addison County is always used as the example, as pretty much all of Addison County is a wetland. So how do you do things in Addison County? So we are still working on that. It's pretty complicated, so I don't know when we'll get that out of committee. Those are the big things in ag. In education, we have a couple bills on the floor this week. Tomorrow, a miscellaneous education bill that covers 3 areas related to higher education that are relevant or hopefully won't be relevant to Middlebury College. One is about private colleges closing in Vermont, which hopefully will not be relevant, but many of the smaller ones are closing, and we want to shore up the requirements for what those colleges do for students' transfers and student records. Also creates a task force on campus sexual harm, which is unfortunately a growing and prevalent issue on college campuses. So trying to figure out better methods for dealing with that. And then also a career and technical education pilot program that would be our Vermont State Colleges and our career centers working together to create sort of an associate's degree that would be sort of like the last year in high school, first year in college. So it's a pilot program to sort of figure out how that could work, and also which degree programs are the best suited for that. So those are the 3 things in the miscellaneous ed bill. There's also a bill about extending the deadline for Act 46, which thankfully is not relevant to Middlebury, which is the school merger. So that is on the floor tomorrow. And there's something else in education which I'm blanking on right now, but I'm sure it will come up. Oh, and I know that you had a question about the Vermont State Colleges and students, and I can talk about that if you want to get to that question right away, but that's relevant.
I'm interested in more opportunities. I grew up in New York when you could go to public school all the way through your baccalaureate free. And I would like to see us move in that direction here. This has, of course, no relevance to Middlebury College.
Right.
I'm talking about affordable education.
So we are in the Senate Education Committee working on a bill that's called the Vermont Promise Scholarship Program. Some people call it free tuition, but I don't know that we'll ever get to the point where we can provide completely free tuition. But we are looking at different proposals for how to do that, specifically for Vermont students who go to either Vermont State Colleges or Vermont State Colleges or UVM. So it would not likely hit the private institutions, but
No,
yeah.
It should be public.
Yeah, so the public institutions, my focus has been on the Vermont State Colleges because that's where the vast majority of students are Vermonters that go there, and they also often tend to be the neediest students. So that's been my focus. We have various proposals on the table. It's probably going to be a 2-year process where we try to figure out what we think we can do and what we think we can afford and put together a package, hopefully pass it out of the Senate this year, and then it would go over to the House next year and hopefully go into effect the following year. But really trying to figure out how to make higher education more affordable for Vermont students. We've heard incredible testimony from students. For example, a student last week talked to us. She's a social work student at Castleton and is going to graduate with $100,000 in debt as a social worker. So those are the kind of stories that you hear and you realize we have to do something. And this is also about keeping young people in Vermont or attracting young people to Vermont and making sure that we have a workforce that can fill the jobs that we have here. So that's definitely a big focus of ours. There is a bill that we're working off of, but I think it will probably get morphed into a different program by the time it's finished. But it's definitely one of my priorities personally, and something that I'm trying to spearhead on the education committee. And others are supportive too. It's just a matter of what we can do and what we can afford, as you all know very well. So, yeah.
Robin Shy sends her regrets. She had a death in the family, but did note that there's an additional $3 million included in the budget currently for state colleges.
Yeah, that was actually included in the governor's budget, as was the funding for this pilot program that I mentioned before, the Career Center / Vermont Tech College's pilot program, which I think is a $200,000 project. So I'm pretty sure, as far as I know, that funding will stay through. I think everybody's supportive of keeping that funding in the budget. And then the scholarship program would be in addition in a future year.
Okay, thank you. Who would like to ask their next question? We have some questions that were submitted. I would assume we'd start with those.
Okay, I can go first if you want. One of the things I want to ask about is safety, highway safety in the state of Vermont, specifically around the town of Middlebury, the Exchange Street Roundabout. When I first came about 24 years ago, I heard that talk about the roundabout, and still there's, once in a while when we have an accident, we start talking about it, then nothing happens. So I want to know what we are doing about how do we move it up on the priority list. And do you want me to go ahead with the second one, or?
Well, I want to jump in.
Let's take them one at a time.
Sure.
So I did ask about this when I got back this year, because I had the same feeling, and having worked off of Exchange Street, I know how challenging it is to get out of there at certain times of day especially. So my sense was that the rail project had, sort of consumed so much bandwidth that V-Trans was just saying, it's a little bit on the, not on the back burner exactly, but they were concentrating on the rail project and telling me, yes, they were aware about the roundabout, and I should, continue to nudge them, but I didn't get no definitive answer about an exact schedule. So you're reminding me to check back in. I don't know if the TAC has gotten hard information back through the local planning group.
So the question itself is, what does it take for it to move forward is one question. We had an accident last year on 125, and there was a fatal death. Somebody died on it. And we are putting a Band-Aid on it, put some rumble strips and stuff. We are not even considering reducing the speed limit on that stretch of the road. The V-Trans doesn't agree to that. And I'm just wondering, why does it work this way?
I don't have a very satisfactory answer. I went through a whole thing trying to reduce the speed limit up by Breadloaf. There was a traffic study. We worked on it for like a year and a half. And in the end, V-Trans came back and said they thought the limit was fine. But you know how it is up there. It may be fine if the road is open, but by the time a lot of people park, and then you have people at events, and they're not paying attention to it as a highway, people are wandering across the road. It seems like a dangerous thing, but I guess I'd be happy to pursue it again and try to get a clearer feedback about what they're thinking on the Exchange Street roundabout. But honestly, I don't have a very solid answer other than, from the town side, having it at the top of the list or in the next action group for what the tactical plan is moving. That's the most influential step I know of.
Are you talking about, you're talking about two different places, aren't you? The Exchange Street roundabout on Route 7 and then the 125 between Weybridge and, is that the strip which I drove today, and it's absolutely still a problem. That one, I believe you all and the planning commission just sent a letter to the Agency of Transportation. And I asked Adam Logie, Lugie, if he'd heard anything back yet, and to keep me up to date as to whether he wanted us as your delegation to press that a little bit more. I haven't heard back from him, but, you know, we can definitely press the Agency of Transportation and say, you know, we need an answer to this if you haven't heard anything back. It's been a few weeks, and I'm happy to write that email on behalf of the delegation and say, we'd like more information. So if that's something you all want us to do, you know, from the four of us, including Robin, are you all happy with that? I mean, in terms of the Roundabout project, that's a much bigger, more expensive project. I've heard, you know, Chris and I represent 26 towns, and we hear from all of them that they have projects that they want done, and as you all know, there's only so much money. So I don't know where that falls in terms of the priority in the state. My sense is probably what Senator Bray said, that they think Middlebury's sort of tied up, almost literally, by the train thing downtown, so they're probably not gonna do that roundabout at this point, but I don't know.
The train thing is much more recent though, and this has been dragging along.
You're right.
You're
No, it's true. Yeah, no, you're right. I'm glad you brought this up, and I'll follow up with the House Transportation. I mean, we have the book. This is in the book. It's somewhere in the queue, and I'll find out where it is in the queue.
If you could, Amy, just to get us a status, when I asked Adam Luigi for an update, he was told it's in the books as well. It'd just be nice to know where
Where?
it sits on the priority list, because it's the number one priority for the Regional Planning Commission, is what we were told. And so, you know, where does that priority fall for future projects within the state and getting into the funding cycle and projections? That last I knew, it wasn't even into that cycle yet.
Yeah.
So you'll follow up on that, and I'll follow up on 125. Okay.
In this connection, in the local control bill and so on, would that extend over to, say, traffic, control of traffic? I know we've had a long problem in this town with speed limits, which the town cannot control if it happens to be a state highway. And I'm just wondering if, I think some of Farhad's concerns there can be remedial measures taken if the town had more control over traffic regulations within its jurisdiction.
So the bill is S-106, and it's coming to the floor this week. I think because it's a pilot, I don't know how that it's actually going to sort out in terms of, this is one of the things, how much control is the state willing to cede? What I need kind of oversight of, you know, here we have roads, state roads crossing right through town. I don't know how that would play out, you know, under the pilot. Karen Horn, who's, I guess, on the
speaker,
participating, she may have more details about what they're hoping to achieve on that. But traffic control was a regular issue that came up. Things as simple as getting a stop sign installed in a location, or getting a crosswalk across a state road, things like that.
So, if I may, we are actually talking to the Agency of Transportation tomorrow morning about this very issue, and in particular, the question of state highways that go through downtown and congested areas where it might be appropriate for towns to have authority to accept bike lanes and speed limits and parking and those kinds of things. So hopefully that's a good conversation tomorrow, but it was an issue that the Secretary of Transportation raised in the context of S-106 on Friday.
Good.
Thank you, Karen. Heather?
Can I ask a question related to this pilot program? Do you know what the 10 towns are and how they'll be selected? And is there any chance we might be, or if we want, I don't
Sure.
even know if we want to be,
Yeah.
but,
Right. So right now, there is a process designed to select based on, like some considerations of geography, stuff like that. There are towns that are already very interested, that have been talking to Senator White, who introduced the bill. But I don't think the selection process is designed to make sure that just because you were the first person to hear about it doesn't mean you're going to have the inside track on being a selected pilot town.
so I'm not sure.
So it'll be competitive.
We've had a conversation about whether we'd want to be a part of that, but it would be nice to know what if you could email Kathleen what the selection process is, so we could consider it at some point.
Happy to do that. And, again, just because it's only now coming to the Senate floor, it's got to get through the House. Who knows what it will look like in the end, but I'll certainly send the bill. And Karen has been a very steady participant representing you all in the room, so I'm sure she'll be keeping a close eye on it as it keeps moving its way down the line.
I know other people have questions, but can I
Go
keep going?
ahead.
So I had a question about the carbon tax but more broadly, one of the things we're dealing with on infrastructure in Middlebury is how to sustainably fund infrastructure projects going forward. And I'm curious what conversations the state's having around these ideas. The whole carbon tax thing in just broadly concerns me because at the same time we're trying to reduce carbon use, reduce carbon emissions, but we're going to tax to fund things when we're trying to reduce that money. And it seems a little counterproductive to me. And I wonder, as we moved more towards electrical vehicles, how are we including them in the cost of infrastructure? Because they're using the same roads, even if they're not, using carbon-based fuel. So that's a huge, we could probably spend 2 hours. So if you want to send information later, I'm just interested in what the state's thinking about in that area and, how you're going to fund infrastructure projects.
You have the answer to the electric vehicles.
Yeah,
I've heard you
so-
answer this before.
So we had an electric vehicle bill that didn't make it out last year. I think mostly got turned into a study to address just those sorts of questions. So last year's proposal was to help people get into electric vehicles, waiving purchasing use tax on the first $30,000, and then to help for having people who already have electric vehicles to pay in. It was, for 2 years, it said pay a flat $100 registration fee on top of ordinary registration. And that was based on if you bought last year's, a average new vehicle, what would the average Vermonter driving the average number of miles in that average new vehicle spending gas tax? It was $102. So he said, okay, let's just call it even 100, and for the time being, have someone with EVs paying in at that level. The ideal thing, I think, is more nuanced. Like the more you use the roads, the more you pay. Just like gas tax, you have to pump longer, you're paying more tax. So what's going forward? What got spun off as a study issue now? I think it's coming back, and legislation will be drafted on it. But I don't think it will pass this year. I think it's still a work in progress. It's that when you charge, we'll be measuring kilowatts that go into charging that vehicle, and your gas tax, your road tax, would be a surcharge on the kilowatts, so that if you're a heavy user, you'll pay in more. If you're a light user, you'll pay in less, and try to keep it proportional. So I think that's the direction the state is going. But overall, road, fuel-based receipts, whether it's electricity or gas, declining as these things get more efficient. So that's great news, but it does mean that the funds available to support roads and bridges is under perpetual stress, and it's only getting more stressed. So I think we're going to have a day of reckoning. Either rates will need to go up, or they'll dedicate other revenues.
So are there any conversations around how to sustainably fund infrastructure going forward? Is anybody having those conversations?
There's a lot of different sorts of infrastructure, and I think that, we could all talk about different infrastructure we see, whether it's schools or natural resource stuff or energy stuff, where the state, I'd say,
I think Heather's talking roads and bridges.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, we've got water, we got sewer, we got, it's all,
So we did take some really compelling testimony that got my committee's attention around the needs for community water supplies and updating that infrastructure. It's like $25 million a year, I think, is looking like is going to be needed really soon. Talking about the water systems that we do have that are town water systems, just that. I know a few years ago we found one of the last wooden pipes, right, under, it's like, that stuff's still out there, and there's a sort of, you're right, to draw attention to it, so that's the level that, we're interested in it, and we talk about it, actually, when we talk about funding clean water, we kind of wonder about rolling in planning for the town water systems in that same conversation. So that's come up in my committee when we've talked about the water funding.
so there's little conversations
There's an awareness of
happening.
that happening, yeah.
and there's
For
a state,
water.
2 revolving loan funds, one for public water supplies, the other for, the sort of
Yep.
wastewater and wastewater treatment facilities, sewer systems, all that. And I think the wastewater fund has roughly $80 million available to be loaned, and it's either low interest, 0 interest, or even by the time they give you credit on fees, you end up with a negative interest loan on some of those programs. There's less money, closer to $30 million in the public water, drinking water fund, and I think that's good to know that there's an adequate balance available. If it turns out, for instance, that a town had to do work related to PFOA, there would be funds available. PFOA is sort of an emerging situation, so the state has actually been particularly careful to grant money in a timely way down in Bennington to make sure that people are getting clean water, basically ASAP, or supplied with other potable water till a more permanent solution can be figured out. But the total spend around Bennington is roughly $50 million. Most of that's coming from St. Gobain in the form of a settlement.
So just to give you a sense, we have about $22 million worth of just water
Yeah,
projects.
that's the kind of, the
to
state
do-
is
to do
definitely aware of that.
in Middlebury.
That's what we've heard, is it's
So
more.
a $30 million
Nothing.
pot to loan from is,
Like, it gets
Is-
recharged every year.
There are several towns that have just done pretty major bond issues. For Burlington, I think was $100 million. I don't know what that is.
30 million.
30 million for the
this
water, and
summer.
plus there was a school bond in there, I think. So a lot, and I think for Jens is sort of heading to that direction of
We-
trying
we
to
are.
look for it, yeah.
Right.
we are too.
Yeah, and then just related to water, but also schools, is the first bill that education worked on was the lead drinking water testing in schools to test for lead in school water. And sort of the conversation about infrastructure has come up pretty large in the education area because we have so many old schools. And there's been a moratorium on state aid for school construction for at least 5, maybe 10 years at this point. So there's a lot of pent-up demand around the state. We get showered with postcards written by kids saying, my school is falling apart, please help. It's really kind of sad. So that's going to be an issue for schools, and we're trying to consider, what we could afford, because once you sort of let the gates out, it's going to be a huge demand. But the lead testing in schools is funded through our budget adjustment, and then there's some matching state money if there's some remediation that's required. Generally, the remediation so far has been pretty minimal. It's been like changing out taps, but it could be more than that. It could be more, digging out the plumbing in some cases. So it could be a bigger issue. So it's across the board, this infrastructure problems.
So we probably can go about 10 more minutes, so Nick, did you want to ask a question?
Well, thanks for coming. I wish we had hours, and I wish it was the only topics, or you were the only people that we had to focus on tonight, because there's so much, and you've hit already on so many things. I mean, education, that's dear. And when I see some of the stuff that we don't have, and I see what other places are doing, I think we have room to do better. Our technical training is, second class when you compare to what they do in Europe and Japan and places like that. I actually had a chance to observe on a project I was working on. It was an unusual one, but that in California, a lot of the food producers work with the community college, and they actually develop programs for both a combination of an associate's degree and then a certificate to work in food production facilities. And I thought that was really interesting and great opportunities. It provides infrastructure, as you said, Senator Bray, a day of reckoning, that's long past. When I look at the quality of the roads and the water lines in places like Sweden and Norway, and not only do they cost, but the fact is these things aren't free, but in fact they do them so well that they don't have to replace them. And when you look at the upfront cost, maybe it's more in the line of a fuel tax or a road use tax, but in fact it overall costs less, because when you have somebody damages their vehicle and has to replace parts or a car, one, that's the really expensive hit, and two, that doesn't do much for environmental issues, because when you have to replace a car prematurely, then that's the much higher energy demand. Plus, just the way they don't waste water, they don't lose water because it's not getting transferred from the point of source to the user. I mean, because they take care of stuff. Electric vehicles, I mean, one of the things that I wonder about is, and that is going to be the industry standard for so many things. And again, going back to Sweden, they're going to start running a lot of their heavy trucks because that's the biggest demand on electricity. But then they also have built the infrastructure for it. And I wonder if, in fact, if we were to get, at this point, if we could suddenly have 50% electric vehicles, could we, in fact, power them? Because a lot of the power lines are antiquated. But the thing I really would like to talk a little bit about is the aspect of the Act 250, which I know, Amy, you're working heavily and hard on. And the basic premise of Act 250 to me is outstanding. As one who travels quite extensively, I see the results of poor planning and what I would refer to as the geography of nowhere. And that's not a term I coined, but one I've heard. And we all know what it is. It's, every places that all look the same. And what's a strength of our state is the fact that we don't look the same. So the basic premise is good. Where we have some difficulty sometimes is in a loss of efficiencies and how we move through the 250 process, to the point where, one of the things we have to focus on heavily is also our economic opportunities and strength. There's always a demand for better jobs. We hear constantly there's a need for housing across a wide spectrum of economic range, and that has an impact on our tax base. It has an impact on the number of students in schools. It has the impact on our employers being able to get employees. We've heard more than one story of employers hiring somebody excellent, but they can't find the housing here, so they're commuting from Chittenden County, and after a year they say, forget this, and they lose a good employer and we lose an opportunity. So I guess the thing I'm going to ask is, in this 250 update, what are the things that are being done that would help a town like ours, where we have a professional planner, we have a town plan, we have an excellent development review board, to move projects through at a greater level of efficiency and not create the redundancies we have, where we approve a plan after an extensive effort and then it goes to the Act 250 review, and it's almost like it's starting again. And it just delays opportunities. In some cases where an employer says, forget it, I'm not going to stay, I'm going to go someplace else. And of course, that doesn't work us any benefits. So what are the efficiencies and what are the opportunities coming out of this update?
Right, so thanks for the question. I guess our task in updating Act 250 was to look kind of forward and backwards and look at what is the future and how can we protect the Vermont landscape. You mentioned it in your question. and what was considered when Act 250 was passed, what's missing, and we were looking at things like climate change and protecting water quality and wildlife habitat and the working landscape in a more aggressive way. And part of that, which I suspect you know, is also looking at our designated centers. There's 5 different designated center types, and considering, is there a way for us to, the term that's been used is called enhanced designations. And so is there a way for enhanced designations to be utilized for towns like Middlebury that have a downtown designation and a robust planning already going on locally? And that's definitely one of the buckets that we're looking at. There are a number of things that we're looking at. We did, at the beginning of our process, delve into that one. The state Agency of Commerce and Community Development has come up with a pretty specific proposal, and we haven't circled back around to it. When I mentioned at the beginning kind of our process, we've sort of just gone through, I think, all of the subject areas of the bill, and I was doing kind of week by week and looking at those, and now we're circling back. I would also say that one of the surprising areas for me as I was chairing the commission, which came in relatively late, was the concept of administration and appeals. Back in 2004, the administration or the appeals of Act 250 permits was moved to the environmental court. And in looking at, I think it's also important for everyone to know, it's a number that we talk about a lot, but in the high 90s is the percentage of Act 250 permits that are granted. We've looked into the numbers. The average Act 250 permit takes 60 days. Interestingly, one of the holdups in some of this, when you dig into the data, the delays can often be at the local level in the local review. Act 250 becomes a broad term for kind of all of the permitting processes. So people sort of say, well, it took me forever to get my Act 250 permit, but when we dive into that, it's often not necessarily the Act 250 permit that held things up. It can be an A&R permit, but it can also be a local zoning permit. So there are places that we could be more efficient. From the Act 250 perspective, I think that strengthening the board and putting it back a little bit more the way it was originally imagined would provide more guidance and oversight when you have an active and engaged board working at, they get active and engaged through managing the appeals process. They are more likely to provide guidance to the district coordinators and the district commissions, that is that consistency and efficiency that people like to look to as a way for making the process go more smoothly. I think that's one of the strongest recommendations that our commission has come out with in terms of that. But more specifically and in the weeds, we are looking at the enhanced designation process and how that might work out and what towns could be eligible. The proposal that is in the bill right now includes all of the designated center types except the villages. And that's primarily because most of the villages don't have both water and sewer and are not necessarily well suited to the kind of dense development that you might be considering when you're looking at meeting the goals of Act 250 and the goals of our of the rest of our state around where do we want our developments to go and what's the infrastructure that's needed for them to support those.
Well, certainly, and I can't speak for the whole board, as Heather said, we haven't had a discussion about this, but in the same way, if previous discussion is, I think we would be interested in entertaining being one of those places to be a pilot, if that was possible. And certainly we have tremendous basis of expertise already to start. And we've heard the things of some local inefficiencies, which we're constantly striving to improve, and I know we will, but appreciate that.
So we have time to do one more question, and I've got Lindsay and Laura here. One of you?
For it. Well, just back to the plastic bag ban, because you know that Middlebury will be looking at drafting an ordinance, so we were going to proceed with that. And Is there anything else that you wanted to say about the details of the plastic bag ban that would advise us? Or you just want to see what we come up with
Well,
to guide what you're doing?
Sure, it's the timeline for the bill was twofold. One was, I thought it was there, I've learned from past work on solid waste that it seems like it's going to be simple to adjust this, that, or the other thing, but it's a whole ecosystem. So you start adjusting one piece, and it ripples out how materials flow through this transfer station and material sorting facilities and all of that. So I thought it was important to be careful about how we do it so that we get off on the right foot. People are, and the other thing was Brattleboro has had a lot of very positive feelings about their program. And I thought in part it was because they started it for themselves and grew it and developed it. And so the goal was to balance out moving something in a timely way while also going slowly enough that we could be in communication with municipalities that are interested so that we would, in essence, sort of do a best practices bill, and that's what we're doing right now. So, yeah, again, it says July 1 of 2020 that we'd be doing the different things enumerated in the bill, and I'm happy to send you a copy. And it's going to go over to Representative Sheldon's committee. Could get further adjustment, who knows? But I'm guessing probably get tuned a little bit, or maybe a lot. We'll see. But there's also that working group that will be making recommendations so that when we come back as a legislature in January, we have a chance, based on learning over the intervening 6 months, to make further refinements. So I don't, in essence, we can't say for sure what the details are, but I think we have a pretty good idea. I mean, if you look at the Brattleboro ordinance, that gives you
Yeah, I've seen the Brattleboro ordinance. I don't think that it had a fee on brown bags, for example, but,
Right.
but our ordinance may
Right.
attempt
So
that.
I think what makes this one different so far is it has it basically says for carry-out bags, we try to discourage you can't have the lighter weight ones. They have to be heavier weight. The whole idea is they're reusable. Whatever kind of material they are, they're reusable. If you do want to take a lighter weight bag, then it would have to be paper, and there's a fee, 10 cents a bag.
Okay, so there
That
is.
request actually came from the Retailers and Grocers Association. They said they don't want people to simply switch over to paper from having quote-unquote free plastic bags, which were actually never free. We're spending about $13+ million a year on them. And the other thing is when jurisdictions added that fee, they saw quote-unquote free bag use drop about 90%. So
Right. Yeah.
just a dime was enough to make people say, well, I should remember that bag in my car, or to leave a small bag in their coat pocket if they're just picking up a few items.
Okay, thank you.
And polystyrene was not at all part of the other thing, so we're trying to make some progress on that as well.
I just wish this was a statewide effort instead of selective towns, which is a disadvantage to some of the business owners here. Because if it's statewide, then everybody has to follow. I think that's my thought on that.
Well, that was the other thing we heard from business owners, and they said, okay, we're glad some towns are going ahead, but we would appreciate a statewide statewide program because it will harmonize across all towns, more or less. Towns that are, the way the bill is contemplated, if a town is particularly interested in doing something stricter in that town, they could surpass the state law. So again, it's designed to create a level playing field everywhere. I don't know if towns will decide they want to go above and beyond what's being proposed at the moment, but we didn't want to, out of respect for towns, we didn't want to be holding them back from doing more, but we did want to set an even, level playing field for the program everywhere.
Okay.
Thank you. Lindsay, can somebody give a 2-minute response to Lindsay's question? And if you could read it, Lindsay, for the
Yeah,
viewers.
sure. I mean, in general, people are looking for an update. We passed the 350 Vermont initiative, and I know other towns have done so, and people kind of want to know what happens now, how do you incorporate that that feedback from towns into your planning. And then also looking at the state's comprehensive energy plan. We have these lofty targets. How are we hitting them? What should Middlebury be doing to hit them? That sort of thing.
I can say something about the Energy Committee work, and I'll just be very brief. It's just that we're doing weatherization. State has a low-income weatherization program. We also have middle-income weatherization programs. And so much of our attention goes to low-income weatherization, which needs more support. It's cost-effective, delivers health benefits as well as energy savings, but it's been underfunded perpetually. We only funded at 1/11 the rate that we fund energy efficiency work through Efficiency Vermont. And then we're looking at bringing more money to middle-income people, making it more affordable for those who want to move. Same thing, it's great for the economy. There'll be people out there doing the work. There'll be reduce environmental impacts. And then the other piece is that we're looking at community scale renewable energy. So net metering has been stretched, in my opinion, about as far as it can go to do large scale projects. It was never designed for large scale projects. So we're trying to create another flavor of renewable energy projects that will let municipalities, schools, hospitals, colleges, large power users get the renewable energy they want at a lower cost than traditional net metering prices.
To answer your question really quickly about the state goals and what's the status and sort of the response to this, I think there are responses on varying levels. I think a lot of the bills that we pass have sort of pieces in them that are part of the larger climate change solution. But in terms of large initiatives, the weatherization is a huge one, and then conversations about electric vehicles. There is a bill that will come out this week, I think, in the Senate about codifying those goals into state law, and not just having them be goals, but having them be requirements to sort of force the hand, and moving out the dates a few years, but making them required so that it forces the legislature and municipalities to act. I don't know where that will go. It's just coming out. And then there's a lot of legislators who are interested in sort of creating some kind of Vermont Green New Deal, like it's happening at the national level, and sort of modeling it off of that. There's a lot of conversation about it. I haven't seen anything yet, but it's definitely, I think those kinds of initiatives, the ballot initiatives were heard for sure, and there's a lot of action happening, and we're still just a little bit halfway through, so I think by the end of the session we'll have a more complete list of the relevant legislation that passes.
Do you know which, you said there is something coming up, like a law?
A proposed bill. It doesn't mean it will pass
No,
or
I know.
get taken up, especially this late in the session.
If people wanted to find it, do you know what it's?
It doesn't have a bill number yet. It hasn't
okay.
actually even been introduced on the floor, so I don't know what the bill number is. This is
we
Senator
have-
Clarkson's
It's in
bill.
committee, so.
It's in the House
Oh,
side.
so there's a House-
It's in the
I'm one of the
House.
sponsors on the House side of that bill.
Okay.
But I just a couple things on the, Act 250 has 10 criteria. The first 4 right now are devoted to air and water, and then water on the 3. We're proposing changing the first one to be entirely air and including greenhouse gas emissions in that. And in exploring making that change, we've learned a lot about the residential and commercial building codes for energy use. And we've took some really compelling testimony from the Vermont Builders Association around the need for certifying that, kind of to somewhat related to your points, Nick, but like folks, the builders who are meeting the energy code, because it's voluntary right now, are finding that they lack, they're not as competitive in selling their products, but they're doing they're trying to meet the state's energy goals. So we're exploring ways that the statewide land use regulation through Act 250 can help meet our energy goals, and finding out how we're marketing or how we're keeping track of them, which is also another kind of gap in that particular area on energy use.
Right, another piece that goes with what Amy was just saying is home energy labeling. So so we're trying to move, and we had got a great energy audit done, and when the realtor walked through with us, she said, when I showed her the plan, she said, well, don't bother to do any of that work because you'll never get any of that money back. And we've been doing some of that work anyway, because it's for a lot of reasons. But, so that kind of feedback discourages people if they're thinking about leaving before the payback period is over, that they're not going to recover those costs in the marketplace. So, you buy a refrigerator, that's not all that expensive, but it tells you how much it's going to cost to operate it every year. And same thing with an MPG sticker on a car. So we're trying to move towards having, an MPG sticker for homes, so that there'll be an energy rating that will help people fairly evaluate the typical energy usage for that home. And so that you'll be able to, if you've spent, as some people have, on full deep retrofits, up to $40,000, but now your house is going to be almost net zero, you would like to see the marketplace value that investment and respond when you go to sell. But we don't have enough green energy appraisers. We don't really have a banking system that yet trusts those values as being something that are bankable. And so we're working on creating that infrastructure underneath of the legal and programmatic infrastructure to let the market be more, I'd say, rational. We'll see.
Well, and here's one of the areas where I think.
Nick, I'm going to cut you off here.
Yes, you will.
We're in need to move on. I've extended this a half an hour beyond. Obviously, we're starved for discussion with our legislators, and I really appreciate Senator Bray and Hardy and Representative Sheldon joining us. Maybe we can figure out a way to get you in here another time towards the end, just to hear kind of a recap and start looking at the second year of the biennium. But anyways, we really appreciate you joining us. Thanks for all the good information, and we're going to have to move on with our schedule.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Good to see you all.
Good night. Thank you.
Okay.
I would love so, please.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Next item on the agenda is approval of our minutes from our March 12th Select Board meeting.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Are there any changes to the minutes? Any recommended changes? Okay, hearing none. All in favor of approving the minutes as scribed, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? All right. Next is citizen comments. Is there anyone here for something who's not on the agenda? Okay. Next is memorandum of understanding with the Better Middlebury Partnership for implementation of the proposed plan for redirecting the balance of the 2018 VTrans Downtown Bridge Project Marketing Grant as developed by Neighbors Together. Whew. And this is the briefing that Karen provided us at the last board meeting. Jim, our liaison, has met with VTrans, run that by VTrans that the board had approved. VTrans is supportive of that, has given us a letter of support, and we have a council red line revision. So pleasure of the board, comments, questions? We have both Karen and Jim here to answer any questions on that.
I'll move that we authorize our town manager, Kathleen Ramsey, to sign the MOU with the BMP that documents everything you just said.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any questions, comments? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay, well, thank you very much for putting that together, Karen. Jim, thanks for helping finish coordinate that. And we're really excited, looking forward to great things on the website and the pop-up stores. And I'm really looking forward to see this health marketing initiative. So,
All right, well, stay tuned. We'll be
all
back.
right, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
With that, I'm going to turn it over to Heather about the infrastructure committee events.
Yep. So Dan is on vacation, so I'm on my own for infrastructure. So the first item is the Shard Villa bank stabilization, and, well, stabilization's first and road improvements are second. We had a review by the engineer of the bids that came in. The engineer recommended the low bidder, which is G&N Engineering. The Select Board Committee recommended that the Select Board approve that. All of the bidders and prices are there. I'm happy to answer questions if you have them. So this is a new contractor for the town, but the engineer has worked with them before on other projects and did, get some references, et cetera, on the engineer, and so we felt comfortable moving forward with them.
How did our list that we had approved play in this? Did we use that list, and did it seem to support moving this quicker than?
Is this the list referring to the pre-approved list?
Pre-approved
This
list?
project was prior to that.
Oh, okay.
I think we put this project engineering out to bid through the normal process.
The Avery excavation, is that a typo? It says 23 million or something, or?
I don't believe, there was one that was really,
Yeah, that must be a
Is
typo.
it 23,300?
It's the Avery excavation bid was,
I'm thinking
it's not
comma.
23.
that's not right.
I'm thinking a comma's in the wrong place here. Could it be 233,000?
$604.10.
Let me go back and see if I can find the original document in the infrastructure committee quickly.
Doesn't matter.
But I know,
They're out
I
of the
do
ballpark
recall
anyway.
from the committee work that we had one. How come I can't do this quickly when I want to?
And I'm thinking it's 233,000.
No. Well, maybe 230.
So if it's 233,000, I'm still, the difference between the low and the high is so much, it just
Yeah.
baffles me sometimes.
Mhm.
Where is it?
Was this what?
Yeah, the engineer had them,
Typed,
yeah,
looking nicer.
it's right here.
Well, I suppose the reality is maybe it's just interesting, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, if you look at the three lowest, they're still relatively close to each other.
Mhm.
So that tells me that's the
Yep.
the normalized price is in there somewhere, so I have no reason to disagree with the recommendation.
Yeah.
So pleasure of the board.
I'll make the motion to award the contract to G&N Excavation.
Sorry, I can't tip my screen to get this. So I can
Point
read
it out, I can read it. That still says, that's the,
It's $22,380,410 was Avery Excavation's bid price on the project.
22 million.
22 million.
Wow.
What?
So
Yeah.
They bid a different project. They sent it the wrong.
I
Was that the entire river?
Yeah.
Well, anyway, it doesn't change it. I'll still make the motion to award a contract to G&N Excavation for the Shard Villa Bank stabilization project for a total cost of $89,100.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any other questions on
Well,
this?
does this vendor now go on the list?
So the list that we approved was really about service, like engineer services and design services, not actual contractor services.
Okay,
So, so when we're looking to, so when we talked last meeting about the rail bridge and the storm sewer, and we picked Otter Creek Engineering, it was about the design of those projects and not about the contractor actually doing the work.
okay,
Though the actual work will still go out to the normal bid process.
okay,
It's how we'll pick who designs and engineers the project.
okay, I got it.
Okay.
Any other questions? Hearing none, we've got a motion to approve G&N Engineering. It's a low bidder on the contract. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay, next, Heather, Shard Villa Road improvements.
Yes, so this is the second part of this project. Excuse me, once the bank stabilization work is done, then the road, 2,700 foot section of the road will be recycled and repaved. The town has already done the culvert work on the road, and again, the recommendation for the work was, it was recommended that we go with a low bidder, which is Pike Industries, which is an, oh, I'm sorry, I am looking at the, oh no, I am looking at the right section. Which is a no name on this type of work, and we're familiar with the work they do, and so do you have any specific questions for, okay.
I have one, Heather. The informality of the bid opening, are they referring to that they accepted that that's included in the bid, or there was two addenda to the bid packet that were not included in Pike's proposal, but I assume that they've accepted and they're doing everything for that price. Is that
He
what
then went
that's
back.
referring to?
So I think what it meant was, when they opened the bid, they didn't acknowledge that they had received the addendums, so they weren't sure whether the price included those, and they've gone back and identified that they were included in that price, and they have since acknowledged that they're included. I have that correct, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
They
That's
just
what
weren't
I,
explicit when they
Yes.
responded that those were
Yeah,
included. in the
typically, when you submit a bid, you're identifying that you've received addendum and that you've included the addendum, published addendum in your bid price, and that wasn't clear in their price.
okay.
And I think we wanted to verify that the reason that they were, that they weren't the low bidder because they had not included the addendums in there.
Yeah.
But that was not the case, they had included them, so it is a legitimate low bid for the work that we are requesting.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
Okay.
Mhm.
clear. Pleasure of the board.
I'll make a motion to waive the informalities and award a contract to Pike Industries for the Shard Villa Road Improvements Project for a total cost of $177,874.50.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any other questions? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? You have one more, right?
Yes. Update on the police department, goodness. Update on the police department building energy conservation initiative. So, actually, I have two more. I have several more.
Yep.
You got me all excited that I was done.
One more on this page.
So, sorry, I should have reread this right before. We put it out to bid, and Judy even went as far as calling contractors, asking about their interest, and basically, we did not receive any bids back on the work, and those that Judy contacted directly indicated that they were already busy and were not interested in looking for additional work. So we're at the point where we're going to separate out the project into smaller pieces, where the foam part of it would be bid separately because that's a more specialty, and maybe make it attractive so we could get some of the work done. And then The other infill of the windows, we would possibly roll into the
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 wastewater,
retrofitting and
of the other buildings.
wastewater treatment facility.
yeah, because it may not, the idea is that the work may not be very cost efficient to do on as a single standalone project, but when we were doing other work there, when a mason would be on site, that would be easy to roll into that other project, so.
It was
Does that make
basically
sense?
that it was a small project that would require a lot of equipment on site and specialty
worth
things on site. It's not worth it, so we're gonna roll it into the other.
Or we would pay a lot to have it done as a smaller standalone project too, so,
Makes sense.
okay?
I'm glad you came up with a solution.
So that's how we're moving forward on that one. Negotiation of contractual services for the wastewater treatment facility control building reuse project. So this is the project where we would roll that window infill project of the police station into. So this is where we're choosing to use that list we created to identify a design engineer, or an architect, to do the work of designing this project for us. So the infrastructure accepted Dan's recommendation and agreed to move forward with negotiating a contract with Vermont Integrated Architecture for this project. Any questions on that one?
Yeah, any questions of Heather? Okay, pleasure of the board.
I'll make a motion to authorize staff to begin contract negotiations with Vermont Integrated Architecture toward a contract for architectural services for the old wastewater treatment facility control building reuse project and the window infill and replacement portion of the police department building energy conservation initiative.
That's a mouthful.
You know, I was looking for a pause between.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Hearing
So
none?
again, so he used the grid to put it out to bid, no, because it
No,
says
to select,
to select.
to select the architect, the firm, and now they'll go to that architectural firm if we approve it and negotiate the fee structure
Okay,
for the work.
of the notes,
Because that architecture was on our approved list
yeah.
of,
Sorry to interrupt. In addition, Asher, who is one of the principals for Vermont Integrated Architecture, was on the staff at Breadloaf when the design of the police station was done, and he was instrumental in designing that.
Yeah.
And so to keep some of that consistent,
Continuity, yep.
it makes sense in addition,
No, I was just looking at the notes that said that Dan reported that 3 firms had submitted qualifications, so.
Yeah, so that's on our qualification list. The qualification list, we have 3 architect firms that we have identified on that list.
Okay,
so out of those 3, he had one of them that actually had experience in the area that we're talking
Okay.
about.
Okay, okay.
So
And
that's
with
why,
the building that,
with the
Yeah.
particular building.
yeah,
By area, I mean,
right, yes.
police station.
okay, thank you, I got it.
Any other questions? Good question, though. Because
Okay.
it's a new process for us. We make sure we understand it. And I think
Okay.
working through some of these will get better.
And I forget, about some of those details, because I've kind of already processed them, so let me know if you have questions.
All right,
Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, you have another.
So the next one is, excuse me, authorizing capital expense for the replacement of 515 feet of sanitary sewer adjacent to the rail bridge, from the Cross Street Bridge south to the rail trestle, as part of the rail and bridge project. So we have this 515 section of sanitary sewer that is in need of repair, and if it can be done as part of the rail bridge project, we would have some cost savings, because they have the equipment and they're already doing a section of this work that's within the project scope. So Dan is recommending that we make an agreement with them to do this additional work. And there is an update here that was after our meeting. Looks like that we'll be required to do some additional work with some old manhole structures, which could add some additional costs.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say it might be a little more than a few $1,000s.
Dan's estimate was a few thousand. Could be, I think a few takes you up to 9. Or does
Let's hope we can get it done for that. We just have to remove them, we're just abandoning them, I'm assuming, so we have to do that work? Or it needs to be included
It's
and it
going to be
wasn't?
included in this
Oh, okay.
contract.
And it wasn't initially in what
That's
we
right.
talked about at infrastructure, okay, got it. So, what do you have for questions?
So do we figure, so with all this, we're figuring we're probably into it for about 100,000?
Yeah,
Heather's
that would be my estimate.
Okay, so,
Do you want the approval for that amount or for this amount? And then do you,
Why don't you do it for this amount plus the additional cost of the manhole structures? That way, we're not bound. Say it is $9,000, we'd be at 101. So,
okay. Well, the reality is, there's not a reason in the world why we wouldn't do it now.
Right.
You know, and to not do it now would be foolish. So,
Heather, this is an ad for the state, and we're gonna see some more of this type of stuff coming to us, right?
Yes,
So
I
we
would
actually get the benefits of their engineering and the economies of the crews already mobilized there, so it's probably a pretty cost-effective way to do some of these
Yes.
repairs and long-term infrastructure maintenance.
Yes, and it's probably to our benefit also to have these things done while things are already torn up and not need to come back 2 years later and disturb everything again, so yes.
so Dan is going to get together a bid for the sidewalk work that needs to be done in the downtown as an addition to the Kubricki contract.
I imagine we also have some water work that's on the town side, related to the water line that went under the railroad tracks that we're discontinuing and services coming up Main Street, so there will be other work, so.
here's the deal, this is a big project, let's get it right.
Yeah.
So,
We don't wanna be tearing up
we
downtown.
don't want to be tearing
After
down
we get this
downtown or
done.
something like this, so
Yeah.
this is the proverbial no-brainer, so.
It would not look good to have a water leak
It would look less than not good.
finish putting everything back together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no.
Pleasure of
Would
the
be
board.
permitted, actually.
The motion is to authorize a capital expense to the sum, I guess, of $92,965.52, plus these manhole upgrades for the replacement of 515 feet of sanitary sewer adjacent to the rail bed from the Cross Street Bridge south to the rail trestle, town as part of the bridge and rail project. So that's
I think,
motion one.
yep.
Can sorry, I have to be really picky. Can we
Did
specify?
you start that?
Yeah. Can we specify decommissioning versus upgrading on those manholes?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. It's a little different.
That's fair enough. You-
Sure, I'll second.
Okay.
Thank you.
She amended and seconded. Any other questions on this?
Well, I understand the wisdom of it. Does it mean that we have to delay other projects because we're seeing the priority and the wisdom of doing these while?
We have this money in hand. We're planning on it.
Okay,
There's some of these where Dan was forecasting as part of the
okay, all right.
original project.
That's good. That's it.
Any other questions?
I mean, there could always be surprises that we're not anticipating or
course.
costs that may, but at this point, no.
Okay.
Okay, so if there's no other questions, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Nick, would you care to give the second part of that?
I guess I can. And then the second part is to authorize our manager, Kathleen Ramsey, to sign the utility agreement with V-Trans for the sanitary sewer replacement.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any questions on that? Okay. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? All right. Next is Public Works loader has got some significant summer maintenance needs. Kathleen, you prepared to talk about that?
Yes, so Director of Public Works Operations, Bill Kernan, has requested a large purchase order for $12,223.23 to replace the Caterpillar's air conditioning / heater unit and repair a large oil leak. He knows that the timing of this work is important since the unit will be fitted for mowing equipment and is placed back into service in time for the season. The board may authorize the expense under the emergency purchase exemption to the town's personnel, to the town's purchasing policy.
I'll make a motion to, in order to authorize Town Manager Kathleen Ramsey to sign a purchase order for $12,223.23 under the emergency purchases exception to the Town of Middlebury's purchasing policy for needed repairs to the Department of Public Works, 06 Caterpillar front-end loader.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any questions on that?
So this equipment does mowing? I thought we
It-
contracted our mowing.
No, we have a
Roadside mowing.
roadside mowing, not the Parks and Rec, but
Okay.
the roadside mowing is actually has a unit that hangs on the front. It's hydraulically driven.
Mhm.
And it's also the main unit for mixing sand and salt, and it's
So it's a workhorse.
unusable right now. It's a workhorse. We really rely on it.
Okay, that's it, thank you.
I had a question.
Please.
What does this piece of equipment cost?
A new one?
Yeah. Do you have an,
Probably a couple $100,000.
okay, and we're gonna get 7 more years out of it? We're expecting to get 7 more years out of it. Yeah, and do we know what was the cause of the leak? Is that something that, an engine oil leak? I'm wondering, did our use cause the leak and it's just a
I
part
think
that
it's
wears out?
Well,
in time?
some of it's a little luck, and some of it's, something might have dropped, or shaken in the vibration of using it.
We're not expecting that
it's-
this
you don't expect this to
same thing will
recur.
happen
No,
again in a
absolutely
year or
not.
something? Okay.
No, absolutely
Just
not.
wondering.
It's not abnormal for a big piece of equipment like that to develop that. And the danger is when if you're out roadside mowing and the oil gets low, then you could fry the engine, running it low on oil. And so, while it's in there, to get that fixed is pretty critical.
I guess the engine probably costs a lot.
If you run the engine, you might as well.
Buy a new one. Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Seems like money well spent.
Good questions. All in favor of approving the emergency purchase order signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay. Approval of the annual financial plan for town highways.
So each year, the select board must certify that we spend at least $300 per mile maintaining our roads. And Dan has estimated on this worksheet that we're spending about 42,000 miles per road, all in, with all of our capital and operational expenditures. So I think you're safe to certify that you're spending $300 per mile per year.
I'll make a motion to sign the annual financial plan for Town of Middlebury Highways, certifying a total estimated maintenance expense for fiscal year '20 of $2,778,866.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay. Next is a discussion on our select board subcommittee appointments and board representatives, so it'd be for those things that select board members sit on, and we will later finalize all the other non-select board positions. If you go to your list in the sheet, Kathleen is prepared and been tracking for us, so you can see our past 2 years. After the last meeting, I asked people to send me a note if they were interested in anything, and I got a few notes, and so I'd like to go down through them and down through the assignments. And so expenditure review, I didn't have any requests to change out of that. I would recommend we.
Oops, I did not respond to your.
You didn't, do you want to get it?
What I recommend is that we rotate it, is that we share it throughout the year.
Yeah.
I would be fine with signing up for a portion of the year. I don't want to do the whole year again. It takes a lot of time.
Mhm.
But I'd be willing to chip in with everyone to get it done.
I'm certainly willing to take my turn at it too, if we wanna make it a rotating. You know, I'm happy, it's good to sit down and look through, I mean, we get the check warrants, but it's not the same as sitting down and actually,
Going through the bills.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good idea.
Lindsay and Heather, Laura, since you've done this for HOD, it might be nice to have like a little checklist of what you're looking for so that other people could take it up easily.
Mhm. I could help. I could put something together, and then people can add to it if I've forgotten something. I don't mind doing that.
Well, we all have done it, so we know what we're looking for when we do the check review.
Right. Well, I think
Four
some
of us
people
at
probably
least.
haven't done it in a while. I don't know.
Who?
I said, I wonder if some people haven't done it in
Oh,
quite some
on our
time
committee.
and could use a refresher. I think that's what Kathleen is saying.
Yeah.
How often would you recommend rotating? Quarterly, or what's your thoughts on that?
Well, we
You
got
know,
12
if
months
there's 7 of
divided up.
us and 12 months,
Okay.
So we're talking
Yeah,
about,
I think.
Does everybody take,
Everybody willing to do it? That's the first question, right?
Yeah.
All 7 of us. Are we available or willing to do it? That's one
Well,
thing.
there's a little bit too of a time,
mhm,
crunch and when it needs to get done, so.
yeah,
When it's available to do.
usually Tuesday afternoons between 3 and 5 o'clock.
Well, and Jackie is willing to work with people. I sometimes came in over the weekend because she's sometimes here anyway.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, because Tuesdays are a little tough for me.
Yeah.
She had them ready.
So
But-
she's willing to
but they
work
have
with people.
They have to have it ready for us to, like, if I go on Tuesday morning, she might say, it's not ready yet.
yet.
So you have to communicate with her.
Right. I found that as long as I checked in and said, Tuesday, this time would work, or can we do it Monday, then she would let people know to have their things in. And if they didn't, then she'd put it on the next. Yeah.
I would think, I don't know how the rotating part works. I would rather have one primary and 2 alternates maybe. 3 people can easily handle this. If you are communicating with each other, that I'm not available, can you do it? And I would love to be an alternate, but I don't know how rotation will work.
If
the only
somebody-
fear that I have with the rotation is the miscommunication. It opens up a chance for somebody not getting in and reviewing them.
That's what
Well, if we had a schedule set up, I mean, we know
schedule,
that
yeah.
these, we have a timeline for when we're
Right.
doing all of this. So if we had a yearly schedule, we all know when the meetings are, because it's, kind of written out for the year. So if we had,
But even then, you still need to have an alternate, like you might sign me up for July and all of a sudden in July I realize I can't do it, then I gotta have somebody as a backup. I can't really commit to something in September sitting now, because I don't know what's gonna happen.
Mhm.
I would say if you, I mean, I would exclude the chair from this, and then that would leave 6 of us.
Mhm.
And you would have simply
A month.
3 pairs and rotated. I think something like that would be,
Or you just know that there are 2 months out of the year that it's on
Yeah.
you. I'm January, February,
Yeah,
you know,
right.
or whatever.
right.
We almost need somebody to, I think it would be good if we managed it among ourselves and not ask staff to do it. So, you know, if somebody, if we were agreed to rotate between the 6, you know, I
Mhm.
take the next month, you know, and,
Mhm.
but like Bar had said, if it's your responsibility and you can't for some reason, then you
You
need
gotta
to,
have somebody to,
you need to reach out to the next person and do a swap, you know.
and who do you reach out to? Who is
Well,
the
and-
designated alternate?
So let me try this. In the military, we use duty rosters a lot, and if you want to rotate, if I get Kathleen to give me a list of the next year's meeting schedule, and I'll put down duty roster. It'll be everybody will be a primary for a certain amount of time. I'll have to divide it out once we see the number of meetings, and alternate, and then you, and I'll just issue that out. Is that acceptable?
Mhm.
Move us forward in this discussion? All right, I'll do
I
that.
should salute.
Good idea, because it is a time-consuming thing when you add it up for the full year. So I think most of us have done it some, and we don't have a new member to throw that duty on, so. Okay, thank you. Next is Personnel Committee. Was there anybody on that? I should be asking this question since maybe I didn't get all the emails. Is there anybody on that who would like to change?
I'm fine with staying on.
Is there anybody who's not on that who has a burning desire to join that committee? Okay, I had recommended we keep that committee as it is. It's an on-demand committee. I think we've met a couple times last year. We recommended approval to the select board of a couple new positions. But by and large, it does not have regular meetings. Town School Committee has not, to my knowledge, had regular meetings for a while. I was recommending that maybe we downsize and just have, my recommendation was to have Victor and Kathleen on call, and then we could solicit another. Heather's got a lot of requirements, and then she wouldn't have to worry about being called to another meeting that she wasn't really scheduling for.
So can I just comment on that quickly?
Yes.
When the school unified, and we no longer had, an ID4, this kind of went away. Because the unified district isn't meeting with all of the individual select boards from all the individual towns, Superintendent Burrows thought it didn't make sense for Middlebury to especially meet with the board and not.
All the
So-
other towns, right, yeah, so that's,
So I think it would only meet if
there's an
they
issue.
specifically asked for it, right?
If there's an issue.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that, but.
And if we don't meet for several more years, then I would recommend disbanding the committee, but.
I do try personally to stay up a little bit on what the school board's got going on, just from a personal,
Well, it's a good opportunity to raise the budget issue.
yeah.
And I think that is a major concern, but there are safety issues that come up often in the past in conversations. So that
Well, and there's a possibility of an infrastructure project,
Right.
coordinating with the school, the drive there, and so that time we might need some coordination, as well as one of the comments that we got back from town meeting was that we didn't have any knowledge of the school's budget at the town meeting, and maybe we can charge the town school committee to make sure that there's at least short brief as to what's transpired at their meeting and what's being voted on.
Well, also, the school district is larger, but the schools are in Middlebury. It's special.
Okay.
At some point, I think it would be great if we had the time and somebody had the desire to have a select board member who regularly attended the meetings and you know, those actual school board meetings, but,
Right.
In an ideal world, yes.
yeah.
Okay, next is the Economic Health Committee. Farhad, I was hoping you would still be willing to continue to serve on that. It seems like, I'm reading the latest notes that were in our packet, seems to be gaining
We're progressing.
some, yeah, thank you. Next is the Infrastructure Committee, and I had talked with Heather when she, we all talked with her when she accepted vice chair, as far as her ability to continue to chair. The Infrastructure Committee is kind of at a critical crossroads on a number of projects, and I was hoping for some continuity there, and she was willing to do that. Lindsay, I assume, I didn't hear.
I'm happy to stay on.
Yeah.
You
So,
do know that
but
that means you have to run the meetings when you're not there.
Yeah, I do know that, yeah.
chair and training.
Listen to me talking, I'm ready.
I noticed. So, and then I would look for you to finish, included in this was the terms, but I'd be looking for you, Heather, to finish setting your committee. Everybody's okay with that? Is anybody with a burning desire to be on that? Okay.
Burning.
You can come and participate.
I would like to, but there's so many meetings already.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the issue.
Next is the Health and Safety Committee, and Laura would like to stay on that, but she didn't want to chair it for this coming year. And Nick has got a lot of expertise with the fire side, with the safety, and so I had asked Nick if he'd be willing to chair that, and so that's my proposal to everybody.
The one thing I would like to discuss, though, is the chair. I think that's something I'd like to put out for the committee to decide, because I sometimes have a little reluctance as far as a board member chairing. I think Public Works is probably the one exception, but I think since this is a citizens committee that's a recommendation to us, I like to avoid a situation where it appears that the board member is kind of in charge. And so, as far as being a member of the committee, it's yes, but I think as far as the chair, if it's all right with you, I'd like to open that discussion for the
Okay.
committee as a whole to see. And
Then I think at your next meeting in April, then you can all talk about who's going to be the chair, and
Right.
let us know who's chairing it.
Okay.
What if they appoint you, would you take it?
We talked a little bit about that at the, last year, was that to relieve some of the additional work on select board members who are doing so much on other committees, multiple committees, and the work of the select board of having members at large, or, you know, representatives like Chief Hanley or somebody, having other people that are part of these committees chair the committee, and so I think we were all at the time willing to accept that, and so this could be a good test.
So I think it's also a matter of just avoiding, intentional or otherwise, and I think it's generally otherwise, is the view that the select board member is kind of leading, or is in charge of that committee. I think it keeps it more neutral, is that we're a participant, but we're only,
Yeah,
in many respects, a liaison to the board.
yeah, good point. Okay. Malt, Victor, were you still willing to do
I'd
malt?
be happy to pass it on if someone would
You'd
want
be
to.
happy to pass it on.
How often does that meet?
It meets monthly.
Monthly? When?
Tuesday mornings at 8, Tuesday mornings at 8 or 8:30?
Yeah, yeah.
for about an hour?
Actually, I mean, my own thought is the person that really should be on there for the town is the town planner, because it has to do with conservation of properties in the town of Middlebury, and Malt also has the maintenance of the trail around Middlebury, and they do a lot of, so in many ways, it seems to me that sort of committee that really should be focused on planning insofar as conservation of land is a major concern.
Okay.
And
Case made. Kathleen, what do you think of that?
I'll certainly ask Jan if she has the time to do that. One other thing we also discussed with Malt was the possibility of recruiting another liaison from the town, maybe not as a board member, but just a liaison to
Right.
the Malt.
What about any of the members of the new Conservation Commission? Would any of them?
that would be another group.
That's
that
what I was
could,
thinking.
I mean, they've
could-
already making a meeting commitment, so anyway. so.
Have you been going?
I have not.
Okay. Okay.
So you'll report back to
I
us?
will report back.
Fill in his name on the list. Parks and Recreation, Farhad, are you still willing to do that? Okay. And the BMP, Farhad? Okay. And Downtown Improvement District, Lindsay?
We don't meet very often. I don't mind continuing it, but if somebody else really wants to do it, I'm okay with that too.
They meet very often.
Not very often
Not
at
very
all, no.
How often?
And you might be a better, you know.
Why?
I don't know.
How often do they
Business.
meet?
Maybe
3 times
twice,
a
3
year,
times a
yeah.
year.
And who's on there? What is?
Amy, Ryan,
And Becky,
Becky, Dayton.
Gary Baker,
Yep.
Adam Franco.
Steve from County Tire.
Okay, thanks.
Still on?
I don't have a problem doing it if you're looking to get off.
If you're willing to do it, I think you'd be a
I'm
nice
willing to
addition.
do it.
What throws me for the loop is that it's not a regularly scheduled, so I always feel a little frantic trying to fit it in,
Yeah,
because it just comes out of nowhere and hits you.
okay. In college relations, myself and Heather, by virtue of the way we have it set up, and an alternating third member. Next is Policy Review Committee, and I'd like to make the recommendation, Victor is a good writer and interested in our plastic bag ordinance, and interested in doing some more work for the board. And I talked to Victor, and he's willing and interested in joining the Policy Review Committee. And Gary and Donna and Chris and Beth have been working really hard on the personnel part of our policies, but there's a whole lot of other policies that haven't been reviewed for a while. And I think, I fear we're asking a lot of a small group if we're gonna try to just review them, and whatever might need to be looked at and brought before the board. I don't know as any of us have the time or desire to do that. But the first item that I would recommend goes through there is drafting the ordinance and being, that it's so critical for the town and select board based upon the vote, and have a select board member joining that group is my recommendation. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, that sounds fine.
Okay.
And Donna and Gary are
They're willing to,
interesting to continue.
they're still willing to continue, and they've been, they're hard at work with Chris and Beth on the personnel policies. So
Great.
I
Well, I
think they're
appreciate-
about ready to bring them to us, from
Great.
the last I heard.
I just have one pause about the policy committee, because sometimes the policy deals with a particular other committees' work, you know? So in the case of plastic bag ban, I had originally wondered if the Public Health and Safety Committee would be dealing with that, because you're talking about enforcement that involves your police department. But it doesn't matter to me whether it starts in the policy committee as long as it moves to the other committees, you know, for additional review.
Oh,
Well,
yeah,
that would go
Yeah.
without saying.
Yeah.
It would seem to me that
Yeah.
Mhm.
what one need is a draft of an ordinance, and then, of course,
It's going to have to be staffed, which is why I wanted a select board member on that, because it needs to be staffed with really a lot of the different committees.
Mhm.
And we need to take some local testimony, and so it's going to need to be driven by the select board. I'm looking for a writing organization to start, to look at how we write our ordinances and whatnot. So that's why
Mhm.
my preference is to start it there and then kick it out, kind of like, you know, any bill at the State House is going to go into one, but then it's got to go to all the other committees that, if it's an ag bill, but it has some sort of legal enforcement, it's got to go to the legal side. Maybe it's got something to do with water, got to go to resources. So
Okay.
and so I was hoping to follow something similar of a process with us on that it's going to, once it's written, that it's going to be kicked out then for staffing.
well, I mean, the select board is the chief legislative body of the town. That's its primary function, is legislative. And in that respect, you know, you need to spread the net to make sure you get a variety of opinions. But finally, the task of drafting ordinances is the select board's responsibility, primary responsibility. You have to have a legislative body.
Farhad, are you still willing to serve on MCTV? Okay. Actor, did I understand, Victor, you're willing to replace Laura on actor?
Yeah.
Okay. And Laura had asked, you'd asked me to get off that, right? Just because the time constraint? Or did you want to stay on actor? Am I-
It's a difficult one because they're still in a transition with merging. And I think I want to talk to Jim Moulton
Okay.
about it. But I talked to Victor about
Okay.
the possibility of
Or we could
rotating
make
in.
a transition. It
Mhm.
doesn't have to be
Mhm.
sudden, as far as I'm concerned.
So maybe the two of you work through a transition plan with him or something? Okay. ACEDC, Jeff Olson's our rep, right?
He is for the year.
Yeah. And the Town Energy Committee, Lindsay, you've been serving, you're happy to serve on that? Okay. Are there any alibis? Did I miss anything? All right, so those of you who are on committees that really were talking about health and safety and infrastructure, if you could just verify with Kathleen your membership of the committees, and that everybody's willing to continue to serve, or any replacements, I would appreciate it. Okay.
There was also, Brian, an expression of interest of being appointed to the Addison County Solid Waste Management District. As you remember, we did not have an alternate identified at the last meeting, and since then, Laura has identified a potential candidate.
Yeah, I'd like to nominate Amy McKinich
Okay.
as the alternate delegate.
Is she willing to serve on it?
No, she helped with the plastic bag ban. You met her at town
Yeah.
meeting.
But does she want to be an alternate on this?
Yes, she does.
Okay.
Do we, so those nominations, that one's one that we've already done, so do we need to come back and affirm that next?
We do not have to do it that way. That's just for the planning commission, commissions that are established by law or by charter. Have
Okay.
to go through that two-step nomination appointment
Okay,
process.
so
So
we're
then we can
okay
just
to
go-
do it now? Is everybody
Okay.
acceptable of her appointment as the alternate on the solid waste? Okay, done.
Okay.
Will you notify her?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I have a question. This
Shoot.
is going to be my year of stupid questions. And hopefully by the end, they will be smart questions. That's what I'm hoping. So for like Energy Committee, for example, we're not currently filled, and we have people who are interested. Do we have to come to the board formally, or do we just do that internally?
So we're going to
amongst ourselves?
begin, I think we began today, advertising for members of all of the committees. And so people will come forward in April, and there's a two-step process in April, the nomination and the appointment.
Okay, great. I was trying to remember back to last year, and
Yeah.
I wasn't sure of the timeline. Thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda is appointment of a representative of the Addison County Grammar School Corporation. It's been requested to appoint Bridge and Rail Project Committee Liaison Jim Gish as the Town of Middlebury representative to the Addison County Grammar School Corporation. So as a background, the Addison County Grammar School Corporation, they have oversight and control of the park, which is behind Twilight Hall. Is it Stores Park? Stores Park. Funny,
grammar
lived
school
here
use-
so long and I didn't remember that that was Stores Park. I always thought that was Academy Park. Stores Park.
The one across from Schaefer's?
The one behind it.
The one behind Twilight Hall, the big area behind where some of us went to school, 5th and 6th grade, so,
Is Twilight Hall the grammar school, the former grammar school?
yes.
Okay. Now it all makes sense.
Yeah, okay, so, and that's managed in partnership with Middlebury College, and it has some restrictions on the use of it, and I understand that the Middlebury Farmers Market has approached the board with a request to relocate the market to Stores Park in 2020, which is, I think, probably a great place for them, but it'd be nice to have somebody from the town's representatives as a part of that board, who understands some of the things that's going on currently throughout the town and can help coordinate those. And Jim was recommended from Caroline Carpenter and Board Chair Dick Foote. My recommendation is that we accept their recommendation and appoint him as the town's representative. Any thoughts on that?
I'd say we do it quick before he says no.
I'm happy to do it.
Okay.
I'll make,
I just said thank you, Jim.
thank you, Jim. I'll make a motion to appoint community liaison Jim Gish as the Town of Middlebury's representative to the Addison County Grammar School Corporation.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Questions, thoughts?
I never heard of this school before.
I don't know how often they meet. I don't think it's very often. I think it's kind of a when needed, and really there hasn't been much that's gone on for quite some time, but now we have the potential to move the farmer's market there, and they'll have to take formal action, and so with that, we have a motion and a second. Any other comments, questions? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Keep the board informed on that whole piece of property.
That would be great. That's a gem.
Yeah, it runs from Academy Street all the way through Twilight Hall and up to the top there, so it's a great open space in our town.
Played a
So what
lot
are
of
the
kickball
activities?
out there.
Are there any activities there now?
Not really. The college bought Twilight Hall, which was the site of the
Right.
original grammar school, right? So there's classes there, but other than that, there's the actor pub at the bottom. Those are the two kind of activities going on there.
Yeah.
Okay. Next is approval of the check warrants.
So I will motion to approve total expenditures in the amount of $4,978,455.74, consisting of $4,869,070.71 for accounts payable and $109,385.03 for payroll for the period of March 13th, 2019 through March 25th, 2019.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay. Kathleen, Town Manager's Report.
On March 15th, V-Trans notified Planning and Zoning Director Jen Murray that the town's Better Connection grant application for the downtown master plan was awarded partial funding of $62,500 out of the $67,500 in state funds requested, which increases the town's match of the $75,000 project by $5,000 from $7,500 to $12,500. Unless consultant fees are lower than anticipated or the scope of work for the project is changed. As a next step, Jen
That's great,
reports that she will begin working with the Planning Commission on the development of an RFP for consulting services. The identified consultant will assist the planning office in creating a framework for developing the master plan, including identification of key stakeholders, data to be collected, and a plan and timeline for public engagement. Also coming up is the VLCT workshop on effective property tax appeals on April 30th. Since this will be a year with potentially many property tax appeals, I want to make the board aware of that, as you will be serving on the Board of Abatement by virtue of your office. Information and details about the workshop are in your packet. Please let me know if you'd like to attend. Also to note that VLCT is hosting an economic development workshop in Burke this Wednesday. There is still room available in that workshop if anyone would like to attend. Please let me know very soon.
Thank
And
you,
that
Kathleen.
is it.
Okay, board member concerns. Nick?
Well, first of all, that's excellent news on that master planning funding. I mean, that is extremely good. Want to thank everybody who wrote a letter of support for that. We had some good, everybody was a heavy hitter, and it really helped a lot to pull this through. So I am extremely confident. I mean, Jen and I have had conversations about this, and I think she has a good strategy plan to move forward. It's going to be a success, and let's make this thing happen.
It was good to see our representative come in front of us today, and I hope we can continue this more often than not.
I don't have anything.
Heather?
So Anne sent us a effective property tax appeals workshop,
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
but it's in Rutland versus the one that you,
Okay.
versus the, so I'm considered, there's one
Yeah.
in Rutland on May 7th.
Okay.
So I'm interested in the Rutland one,
I'd be interested in that too.
Okay.
Kathleen.
but I'm not interested in going to Fairleigh.
Okay.
It's at the Holiday Inn in Rutland on Tuesday, May 7th. So, and if others want to go, I'm happy to talk about carpooling, so.
May
And other-
7th is a Tuesday.
Yes, that's what it says here.
I'm interested in that as well.
How long do we have before we can respond?
Oh, as long as you get back to me by the end of April, we should be fine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it says 23rd, April 23rd is the registration deadline. It's a free to attend,
How often does that happen?
not very often. Anyway, that's it for me.
Okay. Victor? Laura?
I noticed that as the weather did get warmer, even though we have the return of snow, that we have more biking and walking out on our sidewalks and in our shoulders. And so I didn't know what the plan was for street sweeping, because there's quite a bit of grit and debris in our shoulders, and I just wanted to ask Bill, what his plan was for street sweeping.
I would say that's probably not until May.
Really?
I would guess a May timeframe. It's usually done at night, so, but I'm,
Well, I
Bill's
like
the-
that you're being optimistic about the snow
Yeah,
and ice. I'll ask Bill what the schedule is.
It is only March after all.
It is. Except that there is a lot more dirt because of the heavy sanding that we had this year.
Right.
So,
I also think more people are using sand rather than salt, and more and more people are using sand.
I know that that's another concern of, is managing our salt and sanding of our roads and our sidewalks. So I don't know what happened with some of the sidewalks where in East Middlebury, we had that picture that showed a lot of heavy salting of the sidewalk, and I don't know what the upshot of that was.
so I know, I can't speak for staff, obviously, but I do know that they have some challenges in how much product the sidewalk units can hold. And when they have to travel distances, I think they tend to try to maximize that space as much as possible. And maybe we need to ask staff to think creatively and how, because in order to refill them, they gotta make a trip all the way back to Public Works where we have the product and we have loading facilities. I don't know if there's an option for, smaller loading, but then we're talking about additional equipment, maybe additional personnel and managing that product, I don't know. But I think that the result is we're overfilling to try to get as far as we can when we're traveling far away, and the result is we are spilling some, and then it's overfilled, and there's also maybe some over-application going on. I think
Okay.
sometimes when the equipment is traveling down the sidewalk and they have to pause for
Right, for
cars
a crack.
backing out or people in the way, the equipment may still be running
Right, and it's hard
when
to
the
control.
vehicle is stopped, so
Figured that.
it,
It's tough.
it's not a perfect system.
I think that's all we need to explain to people that are asking that question. That's why I brought it up, so that people heard that answer.
Bill may have a better explanation than what I just said.
I'll ask.
No schedule to go through?
Know what?
Okay. Heather, you want to help us get into executive
Sure.
session?
Yes. In accordance with, I'll make a motion, in accordance with Vermont's open meeting law requirements, I move again, that the board find that premature general knowledge of the consideration of contracts and personnel issues would clearly place the select board at a substantial disadvantage because the select board risks disclosing its litigation strategy if it discusses the contracts and personnel issues in public.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
I further move that the select board enter an executive session to discuss contracts and personnel issues and under the provisions of Title I, Section 313A1 of the Vermont statutes.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed?